Hello, everyone. It's me again.
And it's me again.
We can't thank you enough for coming to this year's summit. We really, really appreciate you sticking around through till the end. This is the last session, which is blowing my mind right now. And for those of you who are just tuning in, I am Alex Angel. I am the Chief Community Officer at Community Club and Comsor. And with me, I have Brian Oblinger, who is our podcaster extraordinaire.
I'm Mac Redden today. Mac couldn't make it last minute, so they called in the pinch hitter. Happy to be here. Thanks, Alex.
Today we're chatting with Jack Altman, who is the co-founder and CEO of Lattice. And we're so glad that you could join us today, Jack. And if you would not mind, I would love it if you could just give a little background about yourself and maybe even touch on, when you first started thinking about community as a concept that existed.
Sure. Yeah, and great to be here. Thank you for having me, and congrats on this. Getting through these events. These are not easy. We do our own at Lattice. We'll talk about it more today, but I know how much work goes into these. So kudos to you and the whole team for putting this on. So yeah, I'm Jack. I'm the CEO co-founder at Lattice. We're an HR software company that makes bunch of tools around engaging and developing employees. And so we make performance management products, employee engagement software. We make tools to help you manage the infrastructure of the career growth of the employees at your company. And we've been doing it for coming up on 6 years now. So, which is kind of crazy because it goes by in a flash. We're just under 300 employees today. We've got about 2,500 customers. We've been sort of lucky to get to expand globally, and yeah, we've been having a great time with the whole company. Started the company based on the premise that I really believe that people-centric businesses are the future, and I really believe that companies that see people as the primary input to a healthy and successful business are going to be the winning companies. I think we wanted to build tools that support that. We thought that would lead to not just better businesses, but happier employees, and sort of just would be good for humanity. And I think from a community perspective, what we've been really lucky for is there's been this trend in the HR and broader people ops world towards more employee-centric cultures, mindsets, and business processes. And this was a trend that was happening before Lattice got started, but we were certainly able to do our part to influence it and to support it. But I think as a result, community was really important to us. And so what we always believed was that the way Lattice would grow and the way that we would support our current and future customers would be through a community, through a way for HR leaders around the world to connect, to share learnings, to be together. And so we wanted to figure out how can we foster that, what goes into that. And so we've done a number of things, which, happy to get into, but from managing a Slack group with, more than 10,000 leaders across the world to doing events, more than once a week in all sorts of formats, many of which are obviously digital now, to sort of, giving people, leaders, tools to foster community in their own companies or in their own networks and cities. It's sort of been core to the way that we've grown the company.
Got it. So Jack, this is like the first time you and I have ever met. I'd love to hear a little bit of that, like, take us back, 6 years ago, right? Like, what were those conversations like? How did you get started? Like, what was sort of the genesis of all that?
Of the community or the company in general?
Either way, like, let's start from the start,
Well, the company, my co-founder of Lattice and I had worked together at a company previously, and the company scaled very quickly. It was maybe 10 or 15 employees when we got there, and it was a few hundred by the time we left, just in a couple of years. So very rapid expansion. And in the middle there, let's say 100 or 150 employees, we started to feel real cracks in the culture. And I think it's really easy and natural to have a great company culture when you're small, when you're 10, 20, 50 employees. It actually comes very naturally, as long as people are aligned around a common mission, and as long as people are able to, know one another. People can kind of keep track of what's going on at the company, what matters most, what are people up to. But what we experienced at our last company was you get past these larger numbers where you no longer know everybody, you can't possibly keep track of what's going on. And there's all these opportunities without any malice or negative intent, but just without a lot of concerted effort, cultures can fray really quickly. And so we experienced that at our company. We thought, gosh, there must be ways that software can support this. And we weren't exactly sure how, but we really knew that if you can build tools to help people create meaningful workplaces, to get feedback, to know what their purpose in the world is, to be part of a community at their own company, we thought that would lead to happier lives and better business outcomes. And so we sort of got started in earnest in one corner of the market with an OKR goal setting software, and then we moved into managing one-on-ones and then performance reviews and feedback. And over time, what we've really done is built quite a broad suite of products, but all around the central theme that was the same kind of from day one, of helping companies build people-centric cultures.
So, you mentioned that you have a space for these HR professionals, and I'm really curious, when you started your community and looking at it today, is it primarily for your customers? Is it open to all HR professionals? Has it changed? Do you have multiple things that you are doing with different groups of people? What does that look like?
Yeah, and I think we started the community like pretty early in the scheme of things. Like we didn't have terrible amounts of revenue or a large number of customers or a huge employee base of our own. But what we noticed was that every time we created an event or a space for HR people to get together, they loved it. And they took us up on it at these astonishing rates. Like, we would invite 16 people to a dinner, that we would host for HR leaders to get together. And 15 of them would say yes and show up. And we were just like, this is crazy. What an appetite there is here for community. And so we kind of decided to see, well, maybe we could kind of, this was even early, because this is probably late 16 or early 17 maybe. And this was before I think Slack communities were a super, super popular thing. They had certainly been going already, but we said, well, it's great that we do these, dozen person or maybe 30 person events or things like that. But like, what would it look like if we tried to scale a community online? And how might we do that? And so we started kind of in earnest, just inviting customers or partners or friends that we had met just through the industry to a Slack group. And it was clumsy at first. It was definitely a clumsy group. It was small. We didn't have the dials tuned right around how do you create great topics? How do you make sure that you've got sections that have enough people for there to be strong engagement, but not so many that you get drowned in the noise. And so it was a slow start, but at some point, not too much later, maybe 6, 9, 12 months, it really took a life of its own, and it started growing very organically. And fast forward to today, and we got all these people, not just customers. It's open to any HR leaders. And people say it's one of their most valuable resources. And the nice thing about these communities is they're self-perpetuating. They generate their own content. They invite their own friends, and so there's a lot of initial inertia to get it going. But they really have they really take on their own life.
Yeah, that's awesome. Can you tell us? So like the thing I'm always interested, right? Because you were talking about like, hey, we didn't quite have it dialed in. We weren't totally sure, what to do, and we were kind of figuring it out. What was like the first aha moment, like what was if you can recall, like what was the one thing where you were like, oh, this is going to work. We're going to pull this thing off. Like, what was that like?
Well, it's funny. There've been a bunch, because there's, if you don't know anything about managing a community, then, everything is new. And that's kind of where we were at, because we were sort of just stumbling through it. And there weren't awesome companies and platforms like yours who were sort of thinking specifically about what is community like. I remember in the early days, we thought, now I look back and I see that it was an erroneous thought, but we thought that a super small curated group was the answer. We thought, you have 30, 40, 50 people in here, and it's going to be perfect because all this, it's going to be really high signal to noise ratios, and it's going to be intimate, and people are going to become friends. And it turned out that those numbers, 30 people in a Slack group when everyone's got busy lives, what you actually get is crickets. And what you actually get is one person asks a question about in our this could be of anything, but in our case, people might ask about compensation or hiring people internationally, or how do you do performance reviews or whatever. And with not enough people, you don't get fast enough answers or nearly a dynamic enough conversation. And so we kind of hobbled along there thinking VIP small is the way to go. And in our case, it turned out that once we started getting past several hundred or 1,000 community members, the thing just blossomed and it became much more vibrant. And it wasn't a trade-off between quality and size of community, but in fact, they were moving up together. So that was one. I think we also had some learnings around like, how do you create rooms and spaces within a community? And I think that's a really important thing to consider, is how do you design sort of the rooms or the space in which people are going to communicate? How do you set the stage? What's the pretense? How do you make for guidelines? And so I think while you're not trying to fill in what's being discussed or what's in the middle, you do want to create really thoughtful arenas for all of these things to play out. So that was a big one. Another thing that we've talked about a lot is like, what is the community manager's role in a successful community? Do you ask questions? Do you engage? Like, what are those rules of engagement like in order to be successful? So we kind of learned on every front.
So I'm really curious to dig in a little bit about the different spaces that you just mentioned. What does that look like within your community? Because this is something that I think all community managers at one point or another have that existential crisis of like, do we have too many?
Yeah.
Do we have too many things? Do we have too few? What's missing? What do we need? How do we go about it? And I'm curious what that thought process was like and how you went about implementing that.
Yeah, well, our community team would give you a much more thoughtful answer on this, but I'll do my best. I think one of the guiding principles that's really important is to have a dynamic and evolving approach to these things. And so, for example, if you see a frequent topic being discussed in, say say a channel about recruiting, and you keep seeing this thing about visas and it's coming up all the time, that might be a signal to you that you want to pull something like that out. And actually there's this related topic, but it's different around immigration. And it's this rich discussion and it's something our community members care about. And so we'll add. Or maybe in a different case, what you actually observe is that a particular room is getting very little attention and it's sort of related to this other one or not at all. And so sometimes you actually want to be pruning and shutting channels down or combining things. And so a lot of it is just an ongoing commitment to observing and evolving, the spaces in your community towards what's going on. I don't know that I could name like, you should have 30 channels or whatever, something like that. But although we could probably agree that there shouldn't be 2 and there shouldn't be 2,000, but I think the specifics matter a great deal for your particular community. And, I think it matters your industry, the type of people who are in your community, the number of people in your community. I think all those things are big influences. So I think the MO there is to just be really observant and to be really thoughtful about what spaces are working, which ones aren't, and then to lean into the ones that are and to move on from the ones that aren't.
I think that's so important, and it's really easy for places to feel stale if you never actually revisiting anything that you're doing. And I think it helps give a sense of intention behind the community space as well, because people recognize that you're thinking about it, you're changing, you're adapting, you're providing people with what they actually want and need at that time. So thumbs up.
2 thumbs up. I do want to get our audience engaged here a little bit with you, Jack. So I see in the Q&A, Mark is saying that his CEO cares about community, but doesn't quite know how to like support community, right? And so Mark's asking, kind of how do you go about that? How do you think about getting that buy-in and, making sure that those stakeholders, specifically at the executive level are, excited about this stuff? Kind of, what does that look like for you these days?
Well, I think there's a couple parts to the question. One of the things that I think is really important about a good community is that it's very authentic. And part of that is matching the forum and the sort of community that you're building to what the people who you want to be in that community actually want. Sort of like with any good marketing, what you're looking to do is to understand people's lives, meet them where they're at, go where they go in their natural days, and then sort of be part of that flow. I think with the community, there's a similar ethos where, if you've got people who want to be in Slack, that's fantastic. If you've got people who want to be doing really small, intimate meetups because what they talk about is way too sensitive, then you want to figure out how to foster that. There's all sorts of ways you can approach this. For many people, community actually is not across company, but you're wanting to do it inside companies, and really people, like in a large sales team inside a company, there's ways to think about it. So I think you really have to start from a pretty first principled mindset and think, who are we trying to reach? Who do we want in this community? And what are those people open to? What are they looking for? What would enrich their lives? What do they not already have that we can provide them? And so I think you need to start with those sorts of questions to set it up for success. And, in our case, the Slack thing worked because, we learned that people didn't have that already and they really wanted to engage. And that, in HR, there's a whole long list of these topics around performance and learning and onboarding and recruiting and immigration and payroll and systems and all of this stuff. And so it actually made great sense for a Slack group. But for others, it's, it's very different, like Y Combinator, which Lattice was part of. Our community looked different. There was a Slack group, but it was not the most vibrant version of the community. And in Y Combinator's case, there's this awesome product that they built called Bookface that, allows people to sort of engage in a more Q&A type format that worked. Or, in a whole lot of YC was in-person group settings. So it was either, during the batch, you would be with hundreds of other companies, or later on, they would do small cohorts, companies that were at similar stages and things like this. So I think it requires first principled thinking and a willingness to sort of test and iterate on ideas and see what resonates. And then in terms of getting buy-in from your leadership team, hopefully you can point to so many examples now of companies where community isn't just like a fun side project, it's a huge driver of business. Like I can speak, just for Lattice, what a tremendous, key to our success it's been. So I think there's also that understanding that you need to make a business case for it, but hopefully that's becoming more and more self-evident over time.
I was teeing you up, Jack, there, because the question was, how do I get buy-in from my CEO? And I was teeing you up to be like, I am the CEO, right? But you're much too humble for that. So we'll let you slide on that one. Alex, you got another good one here?
Yeah, and actually, I kind of want to ask you about what those specific things are that you look at that make it feel successful to you as the CEO.
I think I myself conceive of community as a full customer lifecycle enabler. So I don't just see it as a way to generate leads or awareness, or as something that happens in the sales pipeline, or as something that exists for our existing customers. I really see it as something that is a backdrop for the entire end-to-end experience of interfacing with Lattice. And in addition, I want it to be something that is valuable to people, regardless of whether they ever touch our product in their sort of entire, lives. And so I think, to me, those are the two things I'm looking for: is, does this have standalone value? Do people who never use Lattice find this useful and they want to be part of it regardless of their interaction with the product? And secondly, is this something that touches every part of the customer journey? Does it help make people hear about us in the first place? Does it help them, trust us and believe us that we are in fact the type of company that we stand for, and that, we're going to do what we say we're going to do? For current customers, is this an extra resource that helps them learn about people management and doing, HR in an employee-centric way? So I see it as those two things, and there's tons of ways to measure it. You can measure, usage. You can track it back to leads and try to understand how it's affecting your pipeline, and you can track it through comments in NPS surveys and current customer happiness. And so there's a lot of ways that you can track it, and I think those are important to do. But I will also say, going back to your poke about getting CEO buy-in, this is one of those things, like a lot of marketing, where I actually think it's important to not just obsess about the numbers, but to sort of spiritually believe in its importance, and to not just say, oh, I'm going to calculate its ROI exactly, but I'm going to have some faith that over time, this is going to be a valuable asset to our business and our customers. And I'm gonna sort of trust that in the fullness of time, the numbers will bear themselves out. That's certainly been our experience. And I feel that way about community and brand and many other aspects of marketing that I think are a little amorphous, but critically important.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. I think, it's been a means to an end, right? Like at some point in this journey we've all had of community, it's like, okay, well, we need to prove ourselves, right? Well, how are you going to do that? Well, you're going to measure and you're going to show ROI. And so we all got into that mode, right? Because it's what we needed to do. But I think you're right that we haven't come back out of that. And we're so busy sort of like trying to attach a number to everything and ROI, which, is extremely important. But to your point, like you have to decide as a company, right? Do we believe in this thing or not, right? And are we going to carry it on? And every time there's a little hiccup in the road somewhere, we can't go, oh, shut it down. It's no good anymore, right? It's more of a long-term investment and a long-term thinking, right?
Definitely.
Yeah. Let's see here. I'm looking at the Q&A here to see, you pretty much answered the one here. Someone was asking about what are the other ways, communities driven things in your company, which you answered. I will ask, like, when you started out community, like, I'm assuming you were doing mostly everything, or you were playing like a lot of the roles and wearing a lot of the hats, and then over time you grew the team. Like, tell us a little bit about what that looked like.
Yeah, we had a fantastic early head of marketing who was able to drive a lot of these initiatives. And there was a small marketing team. So it wasn't a massive team by any stretch of the imagination, but we did have people who were able to really drive these things. But yeah, I mean, in the early days of the community, I was, in there making channels and, trying to, get things started and inviting people directly. And I was, certainly all the dinners, although I would still love to, if dinners were happening, which I think they will again soon, but I would love to be at those. But yeah, I was heavily involved early. And I think over time, that involvement sort of declined in a sort of, natural and appropriate way. But I think my job is to champion its importance and to make sure that there's great organizational buy-in to continue investing in this, because like we were just talking about, it is one of those things that's not gonna be as measurable as like running Facebook ads. But if you look back 10 years from now, are you going to wish you invested in a community and a great brand, or in Facebook ads? You're of course you're going to wish you invested in those durable things. So the involvement changes, but I still think you need company leadership to be supportive, throughout the whole life cycle of a business.
So if you're essentially an evangelist internally, what does that kind of collaboration look like with the team, working with the community team and then other teams to ensure that everyone is bought in and understands the value and the vision and all of that?
Yeah, I mean, I think part of it is hiring marketing. One of the best ways I can evangelize it is to hire other great marketing leaders who can, who are going to really buy into it. And so, in our case, that could be a great head of community or a CMO who I know is going to really, hold that torch closely. And so, I think by action of, who you bring onto the team and who you sort of put in charge of these kind of functions, and do you hire community leaders who believe in the long term or who are going to try to squeeze leads out, or are you going to hire a CMO who's going to, continue investing in this relative to maybe other things that would pay off more in the short term? I think those are the sorts of ways at some scale that you're able to continue being a champion of it. So yeah, I always, as you can probably tell based on what Lattice does and how I'm talking, I always think through a team orientation. But I think those are the sorts of things I think about to keep it sort of alive and well.
Yeah, I know a lot of people that are watching. We've had a bunch of sessions over the last couple of days around career and how to level up and how do you kind of get these type of roles like you just described, right? Like, hey, I'm in marketing, but I have this focus on community. And Alexander was asking in the Q&A kind of a similar question about like ROI and KPIs. I'm just curious from your perspective, when you're talking to talent, right, or hiring people, what are the questions you're asking to kind of tease that out of like, hey, is this person simpatico, right, with what we're trying to do with community, and do they really get it? Like, what's kind of your go-to? How do you suss that out?
I think the things that you want to understand are, one, do they have like a really good intuition for like how people operate and how people think? And so I think you want to really be looking for like great EQ in a community manager. Like the sort of smallest bit in a community is a human. And so like what is going to drive that person to engage, what's going to get them coming back, what's going to deliver them value. And so somebody who is really attuned to that, I think, is really important. Similarly, by the way, like I think like great, empathy and high EQ is one of the most important attributes in a product designer, because humans are using the other end of the product. I think that's really critically important in people around community. I think you want people who have got a sense for the purpose of the community. And so people who take an interest in why you have this community in the first place, because so many companies don't invest in this at all. And so it's not like there's an obvious default for everybody. In fact, I think it's really valuable to understand, well, gosh, if I'm on the marketing team, why do I care to grow this community or to keep it vibrant, or like, what are my goals here? And so having a certain curiosity about what's the purpose, and it's not just like, what are the metrics, kind of like we were just talking about, but like, what's the purpose? Like 5 years from now, what does success look like? And what will this community have contributed? I think having somebody who cares to understand those sorts of questions, I think that leads to great long-term success. And then I think you want somebody who's got the skills and the chops that we didn't have when we were getting started, and has thought through some of these problems before of what is moderation, and how do you invite the right sorts of people, and how do you correctly size a community, how do you grow it over time, what are the different formats that work, what are the protocols, what are the rules of engagement. Like, I think there's a real set of skills and learnings and techniques around these things, and hopefully you've built an understanding of kind of what you're looking for by the time you're hiring, and someone who can make you do it in a world-class way.
So this is a great lead into a question that I have. You know where your community was when it first started, where you're at right now, but looking forward 3-5 years in the future, what are your hopes for community at Lattice?
I think one of the things I would really love to see us do is to broaden out beyond our current persona only. And I think what we're seeing, one of the things that Lattice stands for in the world is that people, ops teams, HR teams are really integrating with businesses. And I think that work is really, really intertwining. And I want more CEOs and COOs and other business leaders to also engage in the people operations work. And so I'm hopeful for a world where those roles keep blending and fusing to some degree. And accordingly, I think it'd be fantastic if we were able to create communities for other leaders in companies besides just HR and people leaders who cared about building the sorts of companies that we stand for. So that would be one of the things I would hope that we're able to expand to over the coming years. Yeah.
Brian, if you don't mind, I have a follow-up question for that.
I don't mind at all, Alex.
Thank you.
Please go ahead.
So the rise of internal community is a big thing. And since you are really focused on HR and people within organizations, how are you thinking about internal community management and what that looks at Lattice, but how you are talking about that right now, or if you aren't right now, are you planning to in the future within your community?
Yeah, it's a huge, I think internal community, it's almost just another word for like company culture. It's very related at least to company culture, or at least it's one of the core pillars of company culture. And so community happens all the time, whether you try it or not. And that doesn't mean that you always have a good internal community. You might have one that is not so functional, and you might have different communities inside your company, of course. But I think that a lot of this is about being really intentional with what does that internal community look like? What are people getting from it? What are people seeking from it? What are the ways people are interacting with one another? Do people have easy ways to learn from peers or mentors across the company? Do people have safe spaces to talk about things that are personal to them? Do people have ways to engage on questions that they have about the business that they're not familiar with? Do people have ways to meet new people and make new friends in the company that they may not have connected with? So I always start with the questions and the why, and what are we looking to get out of it, and then build solutions towards that. But I think this is critically important, and I think we're striving to do this sort of thing every day, and we don't think of it via a platform the way that we do with our external community at the moment. But I think internal community is critical to what we talk about every day.
Yeah, I'm totally aligned with that, and I think a lot of people are as well. And it's been very interesting to see how that has become more and more of a focus, certainly within the last year. And I think going forward, I'm excited to see how it continues to develop.
Well, and especially for some of these really big companies, if you're a 10, 20, 30,000 person company, there's a whole world or a small city in your company. Like there is really opportunity to build a large, robust community there. So I think there's a ton to be explored in that world.
Yeah. Okay, so I have one final question for you, if you do not mind.
Of course.
It's a stinger. Jack, I'm warning you. I want you to prepare yourself, my man. All right, here we go.
It's real hard. What is your favorite Lego set?
Gosh, I should have known it was going to be that. I'll name one. Although my favorite Lego type toy was those things Connects. You ever play with Connects by any chance?
Oh yeah.
That was my jam. I love those. I had Legos too, and I had Star Wars Legos, and that was my favorite. But Connects was really that was where I built my little worlds.
There it is, ladies and gentlemen. If you want to know how to be successful and a CEO that's running a community-led company, you play with Connects. That's what we learned here.
What a takeaway. It's perfect.
The highlight for sure. Well, thank you so much, Jack, for being here today. This has been a delight. You want to let people know where they can find you in the wild?
Sure. Yeah. Lattice.com. We would love to talk to you. And I do want to say to you all, I am really grateful that you all are standing for community and that you're sort of championing this movement. I think it is already big. I think it's going to be huge. I think every company should invest in their community. I'm convinced this is the future. So I'm glad that you all are standing up as a company and bringing us forward on this stuff.
Well, appreciate that. And it's honestly exciting getting to meet people like you and other organizations out there that are building community-led companies to try and, work together and spread the good word and make sure that people who are not in the know actually understand and can take some actionable steps towards changing and being better.